Hi and welcome back everyone to another episode of My Anime Clinic. For those who are new to the channel, my name is Maddie and I'm your doctor from the UK. In these videos I react and break down some of the medical science in popular anime series, and today we're going to be looking at the spin-off series of Cells at Work, Code Black. Now, just as a disclaimer, this series is a lot darker and more gory than the original Cells at Work anime series, so please take this as a warning before watching any further. So in today's video we're going to be looking at episode 1, which is titled Smoking, Bacteria and the Beginning of the End. Let's have a watch. Oh gosh. Wow. Gosh, already I can already feel the different vibe to this anime. It's like a completely different series. The drums in the background are playing sort of like a darker tone, and even the animation style looks different. I like how they put these sort of sketch lines across the characters. And I'm also getting sort of like a samurai vibe from this, what I can only presume is the counterpart to the white blood cell. She's got sort of like the long hair and the katana sort of sword in her back as well. It all looks very cool so far. Gosh, this is only the intro and you already get a sense of desperation within the characters here. Now, my understanding is that this spin-off series follows the Cells at Work in an unhealthy body, and you can already see in the colour palette that they've used, sort of every colour is sort of dimmed down from the original Cells at Work. It's very clever. It already depicts sort of poor health. Wow. Goodness, yeah, this feels like a completely different anime, which it is, but she's an absolute badass, that white blood cell. And the colour palette, it just looks so different. It almost looks as though it's been produced by like Zack Snyder or Christopher Nolan. I'm liking it so far.
ようこそ皆さん。無事、赤血球から脱殻をした皆さんは、今日から私たちと一緒に働く赤血球です。この世界の輝かしい未来のため、助け合い、手を取り合って、So
that's pretty cool. They've depicted the maturation of the red blood cell as a graduation ceremony, which I guess is accurate to an extent. Now, red blood cells actually mature through a process called erythropoiesis, whereby the red blood cells mature from their original erythropoietic stem cells. Now, this process is mediated or regulated by the hormone erythropoietin, which is produced in your liver and kidneys in response to low circulating oxygen levels. So when it detects that, it says, here, we need more red blood cells to carry more oxygen around the body.
ここは今日から皆さんが働く体。今からご覧いただく映像では、この体のさまざまな組織や細胞を紹介していきます。
Oh, that's nostalgic. You know, they've got these instructional videos, and I remember back when I was in school, we used to use something called an overhead projector or an OHP. Oh gosh, it takes me back. It makes you feel your age when you remember things like this.
今日はその中でもこちら、胃の主細胞さんにお話を聞きましょう。今何をされているんですか？
これは消化さ。栄養を吸収する上で大事な作業なんだ。
And of course, you're going to depict the stomach as a erupting volcano, aren't you? I like how the stomach acid is sort of represented as lava, and they spoke briefly there about some of the nutrients that are absorbed in the stomach. Now, the majority of nutrients are actually absorbed lower down in the GI tract. But some things are absorbed in the stomach, notably things like some medications like aspirin or non-steroidal anti-inflammatories like ibuprofen. Also, alcohol is absorbed in the stomach. Now, notably, these are also the substances that can cause a lot of gastric irritation, which I'm sure we'll come on to a bit later.
時間外労働ってのはどんくらいあるんですか？ないとは言い切れませんが。
Okay, well that's a bit of an odd question I wasn't expecting. So how much overtime they're expected to work. And, you don't actually think about that, but I guess, when you're stressed or you're carrying out unhealthy lifestyle habits, it is putting a greater burden on the body, and I guess your body is working overtime. So it's a funny way to put it into the anime that way. Oh gosh. Yeah, they don't look happy.
現場研修の先輩方、
すぐに酸素を持て。行くぞ。
いや、
急げ。一人二箱。
はい。
Yep, so these look like they're the counterparts to the red blood cells who are coming in for their first day. And I'm far too familiar with those facial expressions. I've seen them in the faces of my colleagues when on a shift change. And you often feel like this when you're exhausted or you've done a night shift and you're just tired. An interesting fact, though, that he's told the red blood cells to go and pick up 2 boxes of oxygen. Just as a sort of fun fact, the hemoglobin molecules can actually carry 4 molecules at a given time. So I wonder whether this again is foreshadowing for something a bit later on.
これから何するんですか？
仕事に決まってんだろ。酸素を運べ。
もう仕事？
いや、俺ら研修的。
この体には人手も時間も足りてない。急げ。
Okay, so, this isn't totally unfamiliar territory. As a doctor being thrown at the deep end on your first day, I'm sure a lot of doctors have that experience. But it's interesting what this other red blood cell said, and that they have a reduced sort of manpower. Now, I think what they're trying to depict here is that the body is suffering from anemia. And anemia is where you have a reduction in the total amount of circulating red blood cells in the blood, which means that your ability to carry oxygen around the body is reduced. Now, this commonly occurs in chronic conditions, and this topic is about smoking, so I wonder if it's something like lung cancer that's doing this.
大動脈弁が開きます。今日も一日怪我のないように元気に笑顔で働きましょう。
Wow, that's a clever way to depict it. All the red blood cells waiting behind the aortic valve. And of course, the aortic valve is on the left side of the heart. Once that opens up, it allows the blood to flow around the body, supplying it with nutrients and oxygen. But boy, were they in a rush to get out of there. And I think what they're alluding to here is high blood pressure. Now, unhealthy lifestyle habits such as smoking, drinking alcohol in excess, or overweight can leave you susceptible to high blood pressure. And this can have consequences on the body, damaging both the organs, your eyesight. It can also lead to something called cardiac remodeling. And at the end of the spectrum, it can also be dangerous enough to lead to things like strokes. Now, the important thing about blood pressure is that often patients are asymptomatic until they suffer a complication. So that's why in general practice we do routine screening checks of people's blood pressure and try to control it as much as we can. Just like the other red blood cell. Oh, the platelets. Oh, man. Okay, so it looks like the platelets have also lost a little bit of their cuteness, which is a shame. Oh, man, I love them. But I guess, I don't know if they're getting at here something called platelet dysfunction. And this is actually something that's associated with cigarette smoking. What happens are that the platelets are more likely to aggregate together and behave sort of atypically. Now, as a result, this kind of makes the blood more viscous, more thick, and more likely to clot and cause complications like heart attacks or clots elsewhere in the body, like the lungs or the legs, leading to things like DVTs.
研修の映像に出てた。
せんだよ。この体の状況はあれを撮影した時とは比べ物にならないくらい悪化してんだ。あん時みたいな余裕は少しもねえ。
Wow, so he's a completely different character to how he was presented in that video, and he clearly looks more agitated and overworked, as he says. Now, typically, when the stomach is overwhelmed by unhealthy lifestyle habits, it can manifest in a number of different symptoms. A few being things like acid reflux, so where there's an excessive acid production in the stomach, it can be regurgitated up into the throat that can lead to pain. Also, unopposed stomach acid production can lead to things like stomach irritation or gastritis, or even development of stomach ulcers, which can bleed and cause people to actually die. So it can be really serious.
どうしてそんなことに。
疲労も溜まってる上に睡眠も足りてねえ。その上暴飲暴食ときてる。俺らがどんだけ働いても悪くなる一方だ。
Yeah, so what he's getting at here are the modifiable risk factors that can lead you to develop symptoms with your stomach. And you've got things like alcohol, which is a direct irritant to the lining of the stomach. You also have things like non-steroidal anti-inflammatories like ibuprofen or cigarette smoke, which work by a similar mechanism. Also, excessive stress can lead to a high level of cortisol, which can lead to things like stress ulcers within the stomach. And diet is also very important in relation to the amount of stomach acid that's being produced. So it's really clever the way they depicted it this way.
最近酸素の供給が全然足りないよ。
すみません。上からの命令で使用臓器への供給を優先するよう言われてまして。
あ？末端の細胞は死ねっていうのかい？
申し訳ありません。
So what this scene is telling me is that the body is not able to deliver sufficient levels of oxygen to the peripheral tissues, and what we call this in medical terms is something called hypoxemia. Now, this is probably related to the underlying problem that's leading to the anemia in this patient's body. And in this instance, it doesn't look like it's causing any direct harm, but symptoms of hypoxemia can be things like shortness of breath, through to chest pain, through to collapse and death. So it can be really serious.
ごめんなさいね。近々新鮮な酸素を大量供給できるので、その時は優先的に。
本当かい？
奥様にだけ特別ですよ。
Okay, so it looks like we've been introduced to a veteran red blood cell, and I'm going to say it before anyone else does down in the comments, but he kind of looks like me, minus the facial hair. We just need to see what's under that hat.
先輩はどうしてこんな状況で笑っていられるんですか？
休みたい。楽したい。そんなことを期待するから辛くなる。感情を全部殺せば笑顔でいられる。
Okay, this just got really dark. But you know what? This is so relatable as well. I remember when I was working in some of my A&E shifts, and often we were understaffed and there were too many patients coming through the doors, and we would be so desperate on some occasions, that we would just be praying that there wasn't someone in the waiting room who was suffering from something which was really serious. So I can totally relate to this.
なんだこりゃ。血管がデコボコじゃねえか。LDL の連中か。なぜこら。
今のは
LDL 悪玉コレステロールの連中だ。
Oh, that's very clever. So they've depicted the LDL guys as the bad cholesterol guys, and it's true, there are both good cholesterol and bad cholesterol. So the bad one is what we call low density lipoproteins, and the good ones are what we call high density lipoproteins, whose role it is to clear out any other cholesterol within your bloodstream. Now, my job as your GP would be to check your blood work to not only look at the individual levels of those two cholesterols, but also compare the ratio and see what the risk would be of you suffering any complications as a result of your cholesterol level. And if so, then, counsel you on starting some treatments to help reduce it.
肝臓で出たコレステロールを不法投棄していきやがった。
不法投棄
Illegal.
たく、このまま血管が塞がって動脈硬化を起こせば、俺たちが通れなくなっちまう。
Yeah, so I'm glad that he brought up this sort of process that we call atherosclerosis, which is ultimately the process that leads to the development of angina, heart attacks, and eventual sort of strokes. This process can start quite early on in our lives, and in fact, postmortems have found people as young as 18 years old having the early signs of atherosclerotic plaques within their blood vessels. So it's really important to have healthy lifestyle habits from early on in life, rather than thinking, oh, I'll just, be more healthy when I get older. Gosh, he's suffocating. No, wait, it looks like he's sort of turning into like a zombie or something.
大丈夫ですか？
バカ、近づくな。こいつは一酸化炭素だ。
Okay, so yeah, it's carbon monoxide that's doing this, and of course it's a highly toxic gas. In fact, you know, there's estimated that there's up to 60 deaths a year from carbon monoxide poisoning in the UK. And this is commonly from sort of faulty household appliances like cookers or heaters or things like that. Now, the problem with carbon monoxide is that it's an inert gas. You can't actually smell it or taste it. And the symptoms that you get with mild poisoning aren't that specific to carbon monoxide, and often it's mistaken as being a trivial ailment. For example, it can cause things like a tension headache, a bit of tiredness, a bit of shortness of breath, and it's often mistaken to being sort of a cold or a flu-like illness rather than what it is.
一酸化炭素。
俺たち赤血球はヘモグロビンを多く含んでいる。ヘモグロビンは一酸化炭素と結合しやすい。
Yeah, so the major reason for why carbon monoxide is so dangerous and harmful for the body is that it binds to your hemoglobin, is able to displace the oxygen that it's carrying. Now this means that your body is unable to deliver oxygen to the rest of your tissues, and you can actually die from this within minutes if you've been exposed to high concentrations of it. So if you feel that you've been exposed to high levels of carbon monoxide, say for example if you've been in a house fire where there's been a lot of smoke, it would be really important to get yourself to the accident and emergency department. Now, the way in which they would treat this there is by giving you high flow concentrated oxygen to help displace the carbon monoxide from your hemoglobin and replace it back with oxygen.
こんな時に細菌が血管内にまで。
Oh gosh, yeah.
細菌。
Yeah.
肺炎球菌だ。
Alright. Okay, I remember these guys back from the original Cells at Work animation. I think I covered them in episode 1. Now, smokers are more susceptible to bacterial infection of the lungs, and this is as a result of not only the reduced protection of the antioxidants within their body, but also direct damage to protective mechanisms such as the cilia that line the lungs that normally help to clear out bacteria. Ultimately, this ends up meaning that cigarette smokers have more severe and more long-lasting lung infections. Oh, nice. Nice.
あいつは体内に入った細菌を始末する掃除や。
Wow.
白血球。
So as I suspected, this is a new white blood cell, and again, she reminds me of another Bleach character. I don't know, what do you guys think?
行くぞ、シュマイ。
え、行くって。
決まってるだろう。
Nice.
酸素を運ぶん
What
だ
a
よ。
hero.
酸素の供給が止まったら細胞が壊死しちまう。
Okay, so what he's talking about here is a process called necrosis, which is basically the process of pathological cell death, or uncontrolled cell death, or premature cell death, as opposed to apoptosis, which is what we use to describe programmed cell death. So the normal physiological mechanism by which cells are normally destroyed.
お前の酸素は俺が頸動脈から脳に運ぶ。脳細胞が最優先だからな。
頸動脈の方って。
Oh gosh.
白血球の姉ちゃん、ここは頼むぞ。
Wow, so what a hero. I mean, he looks like he's going on a suicide mission to get through that smoke to deliver the oxygen to the brain. I mean, if he didn't, it could result in death of the body. So he has to do what he has to do. But what an absolute hero. I'm glad that I said that I look like him.
いい環境でバトンを渡せなくてすまない。
先輩！
I knew that he was going to be bold under that hat. Yes, I called it. But really, wow, what a first day for that newbie red blood cell. I mean, his orientation to this job was absolutely dreadful. Imagine if you turned up to work and you had a day like that.
どちらへ？
肺だ。一酸化炭素の原因を確かめる。
Yeah,
空気中から得た酸素を体内に取り込んだり、
that's clever.
赤血球が運んできた二酸化炭素を空気中に排出する役割を持つ器官。
So I'm glad they're getting to the lungs to see what's caused all of this today. And wow, the way that they've depicted the lungs there with these sort of sac-like structures with these intersecting blue and red pipes, almost as though they're the capillaries that wrap around the alveolar sacs, which is very realistic. Oh gosh, yeah.
今回の異常事態は喫煙によるものだ。10年ぶりのな。あれを見ろ。以前の汚れがまだ残ってる。ようやく綺麗になりかけてたってのに。
So I suspect all of this grimy substance is tar, which is, you know, a really damaging constituent of cigarette smoke, and it's thought there's up to 5,000 other damaging ingredients in cigarettes. Now, as they've said here, this is all as a result of taking up smoking again after having stopped 10 years ago, and that's the problem with cigarette smoke. Just because you stop smoking doesn't mean that you don't get the cravings. And it's actually quite easily to relapse, especially if you're within a social circle where many of your friends smoke as well. So it's very difficult to stop. So it was nicotine, yeah. That's the substance that makes cigarettes addictive.
この体はなんでそんなものをわざわざ摂取するんですか?
Yeah, I mean, that's the question, you know, why would people subject themselves to the damaging effects of cigarette smoke? You know, knowingly, and nowadays it's common knowledge that cigarette smoke is harmful for you, yet we still get young people starting. Now, the only worrying thing is that smoking causes irreversible damage to our lungs, and we as humans have what's called physiological reserve, which means that we can do quite a lot of damage before we develop any symptoms. Now, if you leave it to the point in which you'll develop symptoms, it might be too late to reverse any of that damage. So really, my advice would be to anyone who's out there smoking to try to cut down as much as possible and as soon as possible.
10年ぶりに再開された喫煙。それはこの体を待ち受ける危機の始まりに過ぎなかったんだ。
Wow, and that's the end of today's episode. But you know, what a way to paint a picture of what, you know, what's to come. And I kind of expect what to know now. It's definitely going to be a bit more morbid. But you know what? I'm happy they released the first episode of Cells at Work Season 2 alongside this, because I kind of feel like I need something a bit more light-hearted just to kind of balance it out. Okay, well, I hope you found today's video enjoyable and educational. We did cover a lot in the episode, and so I'm sure there might be some of you out there who have some more questions. If you do, please leave those down in the comments below and I'll try to answer them as best I can. But otherwise, if you're wanting to find out a bit more information about cigarette smoking and how to stop, I've also done a couple of other videos on my channel, so why not go along and check those out. Otherwise, please do like and subscribe and look out for more videos like this coming soon. Thanks.